So I've been asked to provide a video in relation to how I engrave my polystyrene. So what I'm doing here is just showing you the base on which I'm going to be starting. Now this is a retaining wall with abutments that I've created for the layout, which I've already showed some images of. And the idea will be that what I'm going to do is I'm going to engrave onto this the actual stone design and then paint it. So I thought I'd show you the starting point and then I'll take it on from there. So I hope that this is helpful to you all. So here we go. Now I'm afraid that this is not very easy to see in the light, but basically the idea is that you've got two options. You can either draw lines and then try and score the lines yourself, or you can do it freehand. I tend to do it freehand as I prefer the finish. It's less regimented. Basically all you do is just place the hot knife on the polystyrene and then just drag it across. Now depending on how deep you press the knife and how long you have the knife actually in the polystyrene will depend on the depth of the stone or the brick. I tend to vary depending on where I'm actually doing the actual work, but on this case also, as the knife gets hotter and if you don't use it for a while, then it cuts into the polystyrene even quicker. And if also you're scoring against an edge which you've already cut by the knife, that can be a little bit more difficult to actually score the brick design. As you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm just scoring the abutment and I'm just doing the lines of the actual stones or the bricks themselves. And it's quite fairly easy to do it this way to start off with, as it gives you a line then for the rest of the actual abutment and the retaining wall. So once you reach a point where you think, okay, I've got enough, then you can start the upstrokes or the downstrokes for the actual stones themselves. Now the good thing about polystyrene is the crystals themselves actually have an actual design within it, so you can actually see that easier. So all you do is exactly the same thing, but instead of going from left to right or right to left, you go up to down and just score it. And just remember the brick design, they always were opposite each other. And so all you actually have to do is go from one vertical line, horizontal line, to the other. And remember to keep scoring. Sometimes you might need just to pull away the fibers, but it actually looks better closer up. And also once you go to the next stage, which is plastering, then the actual stone and brick design becomes easier. So again, like I said, take your time with this. It's not a thing you can do very quickly. Get a bit of polystyrene to start off with and just practice. But look at the polystyrene crystals. The polystyrene crystals not only have a surface design that is very much like a brick, and again I don't know if you can actually see this, but the actual bricks have their own surface design, and because of the size of the polystyrene crystals, they more or less give you the shape for the actual stone itself. So again, just finish that all the way up. Like I said, don't so much worry about it at this stage. You can always go back if you want to and clean it, and like I said, it depends how hard you press on, will depend on the actual depth of the stone itself. So I hope that's helpful, and what I'll do is I'll come back shortly with another update to show you how the whole thing has gone. So here we go on the next stage, as I've now finished the engraving of the stone, and as you can see, it's not entirely uniform but not entirely rigid either, so it gives a nice mix. And I think, as you can see, the polystyrene crystals themselves have given a different finish on the stones. Don't worry about the dark, because once that is all painted, that will all be covered over, and it will help just to enhance the whole design. So yeah, again, as I've said, the key thing here really is up to you in relation to the amount of pressure that you put on the stone, on the polystyrene to create the stone. The deeper you go, the more protruding the stone looks, and the more it emphasizes the shape. The less, then obviously once we put the next thing on, which is the polystyrene coating, what it tends to do is, if you haven't gone very deep, is it does tend to actually close up the design. So all in all, this has taken probably around just over an hour to do this whole section. First I start with the horizontal lines, and then I cut the vertical lines to get the actual brick shape the way that I want them. Start off with the abutments and then working across, and then the last thing I do is finish up the top edging section. And like I said, don't worry about all of the fibres. I mean, the fibres themselves, these will all you know, you can pull all these off, and then once it's actually plastered, it all comes better into shape. So that is the next stage. So I just thought I'd show you a quick video of the actual retaining wall oblique slope standing up in position, and as you can see, it already looks quite effective, and I'm sure that as we come to the next stage you'll see that change as the plaster and then the paint brings it more to life in the way that is required to match the layout itself. So we've now reached the point where we need to make the polystyrene more firm and better receptive to the paint. Now to do this you need to put on some form of coating. I actually use acrylic wall putty. Now what I actually do with this is I actually mix this with water, and it is quite thick, but what I actually do is I just get a piece of it and put it into another tub, and then mix this with water, and it turns into like a paste. And really what you need to do is make it as thin as you possibly can, so that it becomes a little bit more like a paint. So it doesn't need to be over watery, but it also doesn't need to be very thick. So it's just enough to give a nice coat to the polystyrene to make it become more hard, and you'll be surprised how hard it does make the surface, but also make it more receptive to the paint. So what I'll do is I'll come back to you once I start that process, once I start the painting, so you can see the actual progression.
Okay.
So time to start the painting process. Like I've said, you've prepared the plaster or the wall putty mixed with water, and it's just like paint. And as you can see, the brush, literally, it is literally like just having paint, and all you do is paint it onto the surface, and then basically what it does is it gives it a coating that makes it suitable. You won't be able to see very much, I'm afraid, because basically you're putting cream on white, but you literally give a full coat all the way through the whole of the area that you are going to want to paint at a later date. You will be surprised how this makes a real difference to the surface of the polystyrene. It makes the polystyrene a lot more firmer, and you'll see once it dries later on, and basically that can take anywhere between a couple of hours to 24 hours depending on where you're located. Based here in the Philippines, for me, this could be dry in an hour, maybe an hour and a half, because of the warmth that we have. Try to get the paint into as much of the joints as you can, so that once you start to paint, you can get a really good mix of the colours. And as I was saying to you earlier, depending on how deep you have actually created the stone lines will depend on, when you put the paint on it, how far the paint will soak in. So it's an easy process. Just take your time with it. Don't be frightened about how watered down your putty might be, your plaster might be, because what you can do is you can do a little bit of trial and error until you find the sort of thing that you want. Like I said, for me, it's a little piece of the actual putty and then quite a bit of water, so that it actually becomes more like a paint. Again, I don't know if you can actually see the paint in here, but the paint in itself, it's just literally like water. That's all it is. And basically I just keep mixing it and making sure that I've got the plaster constantly in the water itself. So there we go, and we'll come back later on when we get to the next stage of the process.